Hey, John, thank you so much for making the time and agreeing to talk with me today. Why don't we start with a brief introduction?
Cool. Well, thanks for having me, Anil. Always great to chat. Okay, so what am I doing today? Today I'm CEO of a company called Atlas. We're an all-in-one customer support startup. Think of us like an alternative for tools like Intercom or Zendesk. YC-backed company. Have been building this for about 2.5 years now. So this is my fourth back-to-back startup that I've founded. So prior to this, I founded another startup called PadSplit, building Airbnb for affordable housing, where we met and worked together.
We work together.
Prior to that, founded a company called Blanket Homes, doing Airbnb property management, and then before that, a company called Partage. And then before that, other things like engineering work, and then did a PhD in physics prior to that.
I mostly want to focus on how you think about hiring and how your thinking evolved over time when it comes to especially early stage startups. I genuinely believe that this is one of the most important topics founders and early stage employees should be talking about, but I find it rarely explored in the mainstream startup focused media. My belief is that any company is really a sports team, and you really need the best people possible on your side to beat the odds. But most founders are not really equipped on this front. My goal today is really learn from you what you have done in your past startups and hopefully share that with others. Tell us a little bit more about the teams that you have built so far over the last 4 startups you have. How many people have you hired?
So the last 4 startups equals about 10 years. I must have hired on the order of like 50 people at this point. And then to get to that, it's on the order of a couple thousand of interviews. Right?
Interviews. All right. I mean, that's a tremendous level of work. Tell us a little bit more about how your thinking evolved over time when it comes to hiring talent and the way you went about adding people to your team.
In the very beginning, I hired generally thinking, hey, this is a simple task. I don't need anyone super talented to do this simple thing. Let me go find like a low cost person. They can be inexperienced. I can teach them how to do it. They'll do this basic thing and they'll grow and whatever, right? Like it, and we'll get such a screaming good deal. Fast forward a decade later and many hires later, my approach now is only hire experts and hire people that could do way more than what you're bringing them on to do, because you'll save money. You'll spend more on the person, but you'll save money for the company over time, not having to go back and fix things up. So experience. I started in inexperienced, cheap, look for a deal, and now have moved to get me experts. Only a few of them are needed, and that's how we hire. Another big shift for me was location, right? And so originally I was like, hey, I need someone who I can sit right next to, someone who's in the same city. And what I've discovered, over time has been completely the opposite. Well before COVID hit, I had made this shift where I was building a team at PadSplit. We basically made this shift. The CEO Atticus asked me at the time. He's like, "Hey, you should. Some people have told me offshore teams is what we would have called it at the time, can be really good and XYZ." And I was like, "Oh, I think this is a bad idea, and I'll prove it by going and trying to hire and showing you that the people that I can get locally are much better, and it's just a much better fit." And ended up like getting to the opposite conclusion by going really deep down that path and figuring out, there's a specific niche where I think you can get better talent than we could find locally by and large at a much better rate. And then the communication especially for certain roles, worked really well even before COVID.
Honestly, you were one of the first people who opened up my eyes to the world of hiring globally the best talent that we could. Prior to PadSplit, I've never done it myself. And like, the funny thing is that I'm an immigrant myself, so I inherently know that talent is everywhere, but just for some reason, hiring people remotely was a mental block for me. So you just told me that actually you went into this journey wanting to disprove Atticus that he was wrong, and you
Yeah.
become a convert. That's like a complete 180. Like, what were the things that really made you the advocate that you are when it comes to hiring globally?
Like I wanted to be very right, and so I was like, look, Atticus, I'm gonna look in all these different places, like the sort of like hubs, right? And there was like Latin America, there was Africa had some like hubs, there was India, there was Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia. Those were kind of like the big places, and then rural US. So I just went down the list. I said, okay, like let's try India, and then I looked for a handful of folks to hire from, and I had kind of a negative experience there. So I said, okay, like let's try the next one. Let's try Southeast Asia. Couldn't get people to even like talk to me or engage with like a smaller, just like a single job. In Africa, I only found what's it called, Andela, which had decent people, but it was sort of fairly high priced. I learned a lot, and a lot of what I've learned from that experience has actually like changed and is different from where I'm at now. But um, I was kind of going through the pecking order, and I eventually made it to Eastern Europe, or what are called CIS countries, like former Soviet countries. Essentially, looking at like Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and then inward to the Caucasus, to Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and then Central Asia, like in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, and etc. So I made it to that point, and I talked to someone who was a Ukrainian guy, and he just gave me a list of like, these are the things you need to do. So it was just very straightforward, like go to this place, interview people. This is how you pay them, because just basic stuff. None of it was super complicated, to be honest. And we did it all before Deal, Pilot, Rippling, etc. So we had made one local hire, and we were looking for the second person internationally. And pretty quickly, we had some experiences where we're like, holy crap, like these guys are super solid and the rate is great. Let's bring these guys on board. And in fact, today, the two first people that we hired internationally are still at PadSplit. What are we, like 5 years later almost? And then the one local guy actually is not. And this is a different lesson, which is basically like, I learned that we need to hire senior, not junior. But basically, like the experience, like it was very good. And that sort of completely changed my mind. It changed my brother's mind, doing this hiring with me as our VP of engineering. And then the team, they fit really well with the team there. And so like from a cultural standpoint, even they're like well integrated. So all of the things that people, I think, oftentimes are concerned about, more or less like the fears were allayed. And I've been a convert ever since. And anytime when there's an opportunity to hire, my general take is, hey, like, don't constrain yourself to like your neighborhood or the people that you can drive to. Like look at the world. It does require a little bit of like discipline to be able to do this communication that you may not have to have if you were in person. But the trade-off for the things that you can get from it, like the value that you can extract, is just like way higher. If you're not willing to make that leap and try remote and international, you are missing some of the best talent in the world. And I would say like, for every one great person that you can find nearby, you can probably find 10 or 100 globally. So
what is the thing that surprised you most in this journey, like when it comes to the aspects of people that you were to work with, or in general, in the hiring dynamic? What was the thing that surprised you most?
probably how few people do it and how scared people are of doing it, to be honest. It's kind of like once you do it, the flip switches in your brain, and it's like impossible to go back.
To this day, it is still mind-boggling that hiring globally has not gone mainstream. It is surprising, and also I love it because it remains to be an amazing leverage today. Probably one of the biggest arbitrage opportunity you see in our space. But the other thing for me has been, and I did not think about it at all early on, has been the employee retention, team retention. Like as you mentioned, the team that you built at PatSplit is mostly still there. And, I went into this journey out of necessity. Mine started with a necessity, like I do not have the resources my counterpart is doing on the, dev team side. Why couldn't I? I'm an immigrant myself. Why couldn't I do it on the marketing side? That's how I just like jumped into it. Having said, the most surprising thing has been the retention. The team I built in 2020 is to a certain extent 90% still there and is killing it for the company.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost unheard of at early stage startups, teams sticking together for that long.
There's so many things that people in tech, like their worldview derives from like Silicon Valley, which I think in some ways is good, but in some ways is just wrong. So like I think the like aggressive grow was like great, and it was the right thing in Silicon Valley at a certain time because capital was super available. If you weren't in Silicon Valley, you didn't have access to that capital usually, and so you had to think about the world a little bit differently. And so like, and I would say similarly, like a lot of the habits that people learn about like hiring, right? Like you have to pay a lot of money, and everyone's basically a mercenary, and blah blah blah. People are going to bounce after 18 months or 12 months. Like in Silicon Valley, from I don't know, probably like somewhere 2016, 17, 18 till 2021. Or 22 even, the average lifespan or like a tenure of an engineer at a startup was 12 to 18 months. And so like you just weren't going to keep them much longer. And the reality is in the rest of the world, the opportunities aren't as like abundant. You can't just literally walk to the next building down the hall and just get a job that's going to pay 10, 20% higher with the same skills. Instead of thinking about sort of like, like, oh, I don't like the snacks here, I'm going to leave this job, or I'm going to like, complain to HR because the water is like not bottled water. People are like, oh, like you're going to give me my paycheck on time. Like super happy. That's 100% satisfaction. So it's a different world of like appreciation and a different attitude.
I know I can get canceled for saying this, but as an immigrant, the level of entitlement, millennials and below, is just to me mind-boggling. And it's just being able to work with a group of people who genuinely appreciate the opportunity that they have has been amazing. Like one of the pushbacks I receive all the time was, "Oh, you guys are running a sweatshop," and I'm like, "This is absolutely the opposite of a sweatshop. We pay people most of the time at least 20, if not 30, 40% above market where they live. They get to work for an amazing company that does things at least 3 to 5 years ahead of the equivalents of their local market. They earn in US dollars that gives them a tremendous level of not just opportunity, stability, because I come from one of these developing countries where foreign exchange, dramatically changes, and they have an amazing level of appreciation that most in the US won't have.
Like it's night and day. Having worked with like a fair number of folks that are domestic versus international, it's amazing the difference. Like there are definitely like some cons at times, but there's
absolutely.
a lot.
By no means fully remote, especially global remote, is not perfect, and there are tremendous challenges. Having said that, if you put the time and the effort to make it work for you and be really intentional about it, the upside way outweighs the downside that you might be facing along the way. And to me, after doing this consistently since 2020, that's just my conviction just grew higher over time, not lower.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I wanna switch back to one thing you said about hiring. Early on, you were looking for deals, more junior talent. I don't care. I'll teach them. Tell us a little bit more about painful lessons that you learned along the way that helped you arrive where you are today.
This is a lesson, like, I think first learning it firsthand, there's like no substitute for that, unfortunately, which is when you get someone who is like super junior, the reality is like, one, you can't just, what you need to be able to do early on in a startup is go from idea to realization of the idea very quickly so that you can test it, because most of your ideas will be wrong, and it's also very hard to know which ones are going to be right. And anything that slows you down, like ultimately what ends up killing most folks is the fact that you run out of those attempts. If your runway gives you 100 attempts, hiring someone that's 50% more expensive means you can now do 200 more attempts. It pays for itself. And what I've generally found is like 50% expensive is not just 2x, but it's like 3x more attempts. And they'll be like higher quality attempts. And so I think that's one way of sort of just putting numbers to it. Like junior folks, like where I've generally, especially from an engineering perspective, where it really ends up biting you in the butt is you'll get like a lot more bugs, and they'll accrue, and the quality of your code will get like worse and worse. And so when you bring in someone who is better, or even if they're not better, like it'll be harder for them to add to it. So it's sort of like adding like molasses to every single thing you do, until at some point you're sort of like frozen in amber for the ages, and can't do anything. Whereas if you have someone that's excellent from the beginning, you can scale that person like much more before you start to hit this sort of like log curve of like too many people and things slow down. Like the details in engineering, like it's bugs, it's quality of code, it's ability to do something. It's sort of like whenever you have gaps in what you communicate, like gaps in requirements or whatever, how are those gaps filled? Like the more senior people will know how to fill them the right way, like the way that you would want them filled. Whereas more junior people, it'll just be a gap, and it'll either be a bug or they'll like completely screw it up or whatever. And that's just part of the learning experience. But the reality is like, people need to learn before they're doing a startup. Your competitive edge, in my opinion, is if you could start with all senior people versus all junior people, you're just going to crush them, right?
Yeah. I mean, as a hiring manager, I can appreciate having a set of people on my side where I can just focus on objectives and not be involved with the finding the how, right? Like that the level of time investment required to get a junior teammate productive is just completely counterproductive, right? Like if I had all that time to oversee you, that would be a completely different story. And the other piece is inherently startups don't have the mechanisms or the development structures that junior employees need, right? Like it's a dumpster fire 90% of the time. Let me ask you this. I wanna switch up a little bit. What is your most contrarian take on hiring?
Yeah. So mine is that resumes don't matter. Basically, a lot of people will filter by like, hey, did this person go to an Ivy League school, or did they work at like a top company or whatever? And I think that can work like through a certain lens. Like if you are in the like again, Silicon Valley, this is like, I think a lot of this is like Silicon Valley bent. Like if you're in Silicon Valley, but I think that like there have been studies, right? Like Google did a study and it's like, hey, what correlates with outcomes? And it's like, it wasn't resume, it wasn't school, it wasn't like all these other things. It was like, was this person referred by someone inside the company or not, right? And so like my challenge or my sort of extension to this would be like, name the top 5 tech companies in Kazakhstan or Ukraine or Georgia, whatever, right? Or the exact same thing for like any country outside of the US, right? How are you going to filter their resume, right? And then, oh, by the way, like it's just a completely different culture, right? Like these tech companies, like they may not be getting the best people, or even if they are getting like the best people, like there are a lot of really good people at the other places. And can you name a single university in most of these countries, much less like the best or three of the top ones, right? What I discovered is like, let me know the years of experience. I need some threshold there. Let me know the stack. And then the rest I do in the interview. And you need to have like a very efficient interview process. So you're not interviewing every person under the sun, but like a lot of this stuff you just simply can't discern by reading the resume. And so as a result, like you set certain thresholds and then you have a very efficient interview process. But I would say like resumes just don't matter. I've interviewed folks from fantastic places and from like completely no name, places, and seen, zero correlation with outcomes.
And the other thing that I will add as an immigrant is that the level of preparation that goes into resumes and all of the niceties of really hiring recruiting process in the US does not exist anywhere else, right? Like nobody pays that much attention or knows that that's the game that you need to play here in the US. Therefore, by setting your bar at where your bar is with local candidates when it comes to how the resume looks, what is said in the resume, all those things will lead you to really exclude bunch of amazing people that could do amazing things for your team. So not having this awareness around what is the work culture and resume culture and interview culture look like in the market that I'm trying to hire, and expecting US standards by definition puts you at deficit. And over again, and I think we had the same dynamic when I tried to hire by the name on the resume, this unicorn from Latin America or Europe, it was always a disappointment compared to a no-name candidate.
Like I've had good experiences and I've had bad, and what I would say is personally not seen any correlation. So what I would say is like focus on like show me that you're a good candidate rather than telling me. And I think frankly that's where even like a lot of folks in the US will like qualify based off of like past experience rather than current skill. And I think that's like maybe later stage than I've worked. That sort of thing matters, but like certainly up to, I don't know, we were at like about 250 employees at PadSplit, and I can tell you like up to that point, what mattered far more is like can you do well rather than like have you done well, right? And this goes even for like advisors and other things, but like far more valuable than someone who can blab is someone who can actually do the thing that I need to do. So
what are the attributes that you look for at early stage startups, and how has that evolved over time as PadSplit, for example, went from Techstars to raising a $20 million Series B? What are the traits, attributes that you believe makes someone a better fit for startups in general, but especially early stage startups?
Like experience is one, and looking for an expert, that's one that obviously changed, and we talked about that. Things that didn't change are like flexibility, right? Like the reality is, and I think it actually extends far beyond this, but definitely at a startup, like structure is very loose most of the time. So you need someone who can deal with that loose structure and be productive. Like there are a lot of different things that you can do to sort of like test to see if a person can work well with limited structure. Part of that is like having limited structure in your interview process, right? Like leave some ambiguity, see how they handle it. So someone who can deal well with like lack of structure, someone who moves very quickly, they bias towards action. Like if there's a question, do I do it version A or version B, rather than waiting to get an answer, they choose whatever they think is the best, remembering that there was this other alternative out there, and explaining that as they go along, like, hey, there's this other thing in case this doesn't work. So can deal with ambiguity, bias towards action. Those are sort of tied together. Like expert in their space, someone who's nice, humble, not a jerk. Like that goes a long ways because you're working with this person all the time. If you add that like unnecessary layer of friction between different people on the team, like there's a tax that you'll pay. And like that can add up pretty quickly. So just a nice person, humble, can like do things quickly. And then the other thing I would say is like maybe this is slightly counter to the other, but someone who like actually has an opinion and cares. That is a delicate balance. Finding someone who's nice, humble, but also has an opinion and cares. Like those are sometimes slightly competing. So you have to balance those out. But like you want someone who is not just sort of like clock in, clock out. Like you want someone who is going to be devastated if you lose as a company, right? Like that you want them to really want to win, because that's what's going to be the thing that sort of gets you through difficult times, that causes them to want to proactively like clock in extra hours when it's needed, not say something's good enough until they are like really proud of it. So those are the, I think, high level qualities that I do look for.
And do you think that is consistent across phases? Like, has that evolved for you? Hey, here's the qualities I look for at seed, pre-seed stage versus here is what I've seen more beneficial for BCD rounds.
I've only personally done this up through Series B, and I can tell you from beginning to end, like that's what I would look for. I know that some people looked for slightly different things, and some people would like sort of bias towards resume experience. And this is where I would say like sometimes like I think when do you do that? You tend to lean on things like resume and what people say rather than what they do, if you don't know how to assess what they're doing. When you get to that point, you're hiring completely outside of your like area of expertise. That's when you need to be incredibly careful. And I would say be slow at making those hires. Like be slow at making the hires. This is like, lots of people say this, but slow to hire, fast to fire. And what I would strongly encourage people to do is trials, like work trials, right? Work with someone for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, if you can. And that means you're going to have slightly different expectations on both sides. But you can know for sure, like a 4-week interview, you can know if someone is a fit or not, right? Versus like a 1 hour or even 4-hour interview. You're rolling the dice. And so what I would say is like, that's a big thing. That's
completely agree with you. Not necessarily contract to hire. I have strong opinions on that front, meaning like, you by definition end up narrowing your talent pool when you ask somebody just to join full-time but contract, no commitment. The level of talent I've seen is that most top players will not want that. Having said that, project-based hire, right? Like don't hire them full-time, give them a part-time project, pay for their level of effort, see them in action. I think that needs to become more of a mainstream approach than it is today.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it requires a lot more effort, to be frank, because you're instead of, like you may take 4 weeks of your interview process and be working for someone that you're not going to, stick with. But the good news is it's better that way than getting fired or quitting after 4 weeks and now you're back on the job hunt.
Yeah, not just that, like for the hiring manager, the unbundling of that bad hire and the sort of level of red tape you need to go through internally just to show that you're doing it the right way. I think on both sides it pays off.
Agreed. Date before you get married. So
Yep. Let me ask you this. What was your biggest hiring mistake that you made? Here is my basically purpose with a question like this. I think we have a lot of survival bias in the startup world, meaning there are so many things that need to go right for a startup to survive and thrive. And we overemphasize on success stories and really underestimate the mistakes along the way. So what would you say, like what would you say is the like biggest mistake that you made you think others can learn from when it comes to hiring?
Don't hire someone if there's like something that's like niggling and you're like, I don't think this is like a good fit, just freaking don't hire that person. Like I've never had that feeling go away. It's only gotten worse. And I've definitely had people who I felt good about like be bad as well, but I've never had that feeling just go away. So like if you don't feel good about them, there are a million reasons you can feel good. It could be a personality mismatch. It could be like chemistry with the team. It could be whatever. Like just save yourself problems, because like that will get worse. I've never seen it not get worse.
I noted down for myself in my journal, if it's not an F yes, it's a F no. Like
Yeah.
I've never seen somebody I felt a little bit something about in the process and ended up hiring, it never worked out.
In an individual like circumstance, like I think generally you'll know best when you're making this hire, better than like someone giving you advice on this. But like generally, as to whether or not that particular case is good, but just don't go with like, yeah, you'll regret it. Yeah.
Jon, this has been an amazing conversation. I already abused your generosity. We went over time a little bit. Thank you so much for making the time.
Of course. Thanks, Anil. Chat soon.